Welcome to Somnistry Stories. Take a deep breath and let the soft rhythm of the rain soothe your mind. In a quiet studio, a cup of warm tea steams and a paintbrush glides across a canvas, capturing the delicate beauty of spring. Let's step inside. The morning rain fell in a steady, gentle rhythm against the bay window of Clara's attic studio. Each droplet made a soft patter as it joined the thousands before it, creating a continuous melody that had been playing since before dawn. Clara stood by the window, her paint-splattered linen smock hanging loosely from her shoulders, watching as the early light filtered through the clouds, casting a pearl-grey glow across the meadow below. 6:23, she murmured to herself, glancing at the round wooden clock on her wall. Her voice was barely audible above the rain's gentle song. It was the perfect time, when the light was still new, when the world was still quiet, when the cherry trees outside her window held their blossoms heavy with collected raindrops. Clara moved to the small oak side table where her chipped blue mug waited. The steam from the lavender and honey tea rose in lazy curls, carrying its soothing scent throughout the studio. She cupped the warm ceramic between her palms, breathing in deeply. The warmth spread through her fingers, travelled up her arms, and settled somewhere between her shoulders, easing the morning stiffness. "Today we'll capture the droplets on the cherry blossoms," she whispered to no one, her eyes drawn back to the window where the cherry trees stood, patient in their spring finery. How the pink petals quiver under the weight of the rain. She took 3 slow sips of her tea, each one measured and deliberate, before setting the mug down on its designated coaster, a small circle of cork worn smooth from years of the same morning ritual. The rain continued its steady patter, a metronome keeping time with Clara's movements as she crossed the scuffed hardwood floor to her easel. The wooden easel faced the window directly, positioned precisely where Clara had left it the previous morning. She adjusted it slightly, tilting the surface to better receive the gentle morning light. The movement was unhurried, as though she had all the time in the world. And in this rain-soaked moment, she did. Clara settled onto her frayed wicker chair, the crocheted cushion yielding beneath her with a familiar embrace. Before her on the easel sat a fresh sheet of watercolor paper, its surface textured like the skin of a peach, waiting to receive the day's observations. She reached for her palette. A vintage teacup saucer with small wells of color, some mixed the day before, others waiting to be awakened. "Let's begin with the blossoms themselves," she said softly, dipping her brush into a small jar of clear water. The brush, a sable round with a perfectly tapered point, absorbed the water eagerly. Clara touched it to the pan of pale pink watercolor. "Cherry blossom pink," she murmured, mixing the color on the palette. "That's the color of gentle hope." She added a touch of white to the mixture. "And morning mist." The brush moved to the paper, touching down with barely any pressure. The color bloomed outward, spreading in a delicate wash that mimicked the softness of actual blossoms. Clara worked without hurry, allowing each stroke to fully settle before adding another. The rain continued its steady rhythm, providing a soundtrack to her careful work. As she painted, a droplet of rain on the window caught her eye. It clung to the glass, perfectly round and trembling slightly with each new drop that struck the pane around it. Within its tiny sphere, Clara could see the entire world outside refracted. The cherry trees, the meadow, and something else. A faint rainbow, born from the morning light, passing through this single drop of water. "Look at you," she whispered, setting down her brush, holding an entire rainbow in such a small space. The raindrop lingered, as if listening to her words. The rainbow within it shifted subtly as the light changed, displaying first purple, then blue, then green, in a slow, dreamy procession of colour. Clara watched, transfixed, her painting momentarily forgotten. Time stretched like warm honey as she observed this tiny miracle. A complete rainbow contained in a single drop of rain. Clara returned to her palette, inspired by what she had seen. "We'll need cerulean for that sky behind the blossoms," she said, cleaning her brush in the mason jar of water. The water swirled with pale pink as she stirred the brush gently against the glass. And then a touch of that rainbow. Just a hint. Just enough to suggest what happens when light meets water. She mixed a small amount of blue on her palette. Cerulean blue. The colour of distance and possibility. The brush moved to the paper again, laying down a soft wash behind the suggested shapes of blossoms. The blue spread and bloomed where it met the still damp pink, creating gentle boundaries that mimicked the softness of the world outside. Through the window, Clara could see how the rain made the cherry blossoms nod and sway, as if each branch was engaged in a slow, graceful dance. Some petals, having surrendered to the weight of collected water, drifted downward in lazy spirals, catching the light as they fell. Each descending petal carried a droplet of rain at its center, like a small ship transporting precious cargo. "The petals fall like tiny boats," she murmured, rinsing her brush again, each one carrying a little world of light. She mixed a new colour. A green so pale it was almost transparent. This is for the stems, the colour of life continuing. Her brush touched the paper again, adding the slender branches from which the blossoms emerged. Each stroke was deliberate, unhurried, flowing with the same gentle rhythm as the rain outside. The rain chain hanging just outside the window created a subtle counter-melody to the broader symphony of raindrops. Each copper cup filled and spilled into the one below it, creating a sequence of gentle notes that rang out every few seconds. Plink, 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 plink. The sound mingled with distant birdsong. Spring birds undeterred by the gentle weather, singing from sheltered perches in the cherry trees. Clara paused again to watch another raindrop on the window. This one slid downward in a meandering path, absorbing smaller droplets as it went, growing ever so slightly with each union. The light caught it differently as it moved, revealing new colours, new miniature rainbows that lasted for mere moments before shifting into new arrangements. Clara lifted her gaze from the painting to study the cherry trees more closely. From this distance, the clusters of blossoms resembled clouds hovering among the branches, each petal holding droplets that transformed them into countless tiny prisms. the morning light strengthened ever so slightly, not in brightness, but in clarity, revealing more detail in the scene before her. The branches need more weight, she observed quietly, noticing how they bent under the gentle burden of rain-soaked blossoms. She reached for a slightly darker shade of brown on her palette. Umber with a touch of sienna, the colour of quiet strength. As she applied these subtle touches to her painting, a pair of chickadees appeared at the furthest cherry tree. They hopped from branch to branch, sending tiny showers of droplets cascading down with each movement. Clara smiled, her brush pausing mid-stroke. "Hello, little ones," she whispered, though they were too far away to hear. Their presence added life to the scene without disturbing its tranquility. One of the birds shook itself, creating a momentary halo of water droplets that caught the light before disappearing back into the gentle rain. Clara's brush moved again, not to capture the birds themselves, but the subtle movement they had created among the blossoms. She added small touches of white to suggest droplets in motion, falling from disturbed branches. The white bloomed and spread slightly on the damp paper, creating soft edge circles that mimicked the organic nature of real water droplets. The rain continued its steady patter against the window, against the roof, against the leaves outside. Its rhythm remained unchanged, reliable, soothing, continuous. Clara's breathing had unconsciously matched this rhythm, slow and even. Her shoulders relaxed as she worked. The subtle scent of lavender from Clara's cooling tea mingled with the smell of damp paper and watercolor paint. This familiar blend of aromas was as much a part of her morning ritual as the painting itself. She reached for her chipped blue mug and took another sip of tea, now at the perfect drinking temperature. "The droplets need more dimension," she murmured, setting down the mug and taking up a slightly smaller brush. This one had a finer point, perfect for the delicate highlights she now wished to add. Clara mixed a tiny amount of Chinese white on a clean corner of her palette. Pure white, the colour of possibility. She touched the brush to her tongue to create a perfect point, then added the smallest dots of white to the centres of the painted droplets. Each touch suggested light reflecting within water, giving dimension and life to what had been flat shapes. Outside, the wind shifted ever so slightly, just enough to alter the path of the raindrops. Now they struck the window at a gentle angle, creating diagonal streaks that transformed the glass into a canvas of its own. Through this living, changing filter, the cherry trees took on a dreamlike quality, their edges softened and blurred. Clara watched this transformation with quiet appreciation. The rain-painted window added another layer to her view, another filter between her and the world outside. It was like looking through a veil of falling crystal beads, each one refracting light in its own unique way. She mixed a new colour on her palette, a lavender so pale it was almost silver. For the rain itself, she explained to the empty room, the colour of gentle transformation. With careful strokes, she suggested the curtain of rain between the viewer and the cherry trees, using the white of the paper to imply transparency and light. The sound of the rain chain changed subtly as the wind's angle shifted. Now it played a different melody, still gentle, still soothing, but with a new pattern of notes as the water found different paths through the copper cups. Midway through the morning, the quality of light shifted again. The pearl grey of early dawn had gradually given way to a soft, diffuse gold as the sun rose higher behind the clouds. This new light brought out different colours in the cherry blossoms, warming the pinks, adding hints of apricot to what had been cool rose. Clara observed this change with patient attention. "The light is telling a new story now," she whispered, cleaning her brush thoroughly in the mason jar. The water had become a pale pink-brown from her previous colours, swirling gently as she stirred the brush against the bottom of the jar. She poured this water into a second jar and refilled the first with clean water from a small pitcher she kept nearby. This changing of the water was another ritual within the larger ceremony of her morning painting. Clara performed each step with unhurried precision, fully present in each small action. With fresh water and a clean brush, she returned to her palette. Now we need a touch of yellow ochre, the colour of hidden sunlight. She mixed this warmer tone and began to adjust her painting, adding suggestions of the changed light to the scene. A movement in the meadow beyond the cherry trees caught her eye. A rabbit had emerged, its fur darkened by the rain to the colour of wet earth. It moved cautiously between patches of taller grass, pausing frequently to test the air. Clara watched with gentle interest, appreciating how the creature's presence completed the scene without disrupting its peace. The rabbit found shelter beneath the lowest branches of a cherry tree, where the rain fell less directly. It began to groom itself, paws moving methodically through wet fur. Small droplets were dislodged from its coat, falling to join the countless others in the grass below. Clara did not add the rabbit to her painting. Instead, she appreciated it as part of the larger world that informed her work, a quiet reminder of the life that continued all around, undisturbed by her watching. The rain fell on the rabbit just as it fell on the cherry trees, on the meadow, on the studio roof, connecting all things in its gentle persistence. Clara stretched her fingers gently, extending each one in turn before relaxing them. She had been holding the brush for nearly an hour now, and this small movement helped to keep her hands from growing stiff. The rain continued its steady percussion on the roof and windows, a sound so constant it had become like silence, a foundation upon which all other sounds were built. "Let's step back and see what we have," she murmured, rising slowly from her wicker chair. The crocheted cushion kept its impression of her for a moment, before gradually returning to its original shape. Clara moved 3 steps back from her easel, tilting her head slightly as she observed her work from this new distance. The painting had taken on a life of its own, as they always did. What began as an attempt to capture the rain-laden cherry blossoms had evolved into something more, a study of light passing through layers of transparency. The raindrops on the window, the raindrops on the blossoms, the rain itself falling between, all created veils through which light travelled, changed, and emerged transformed. It needs more depth in the background, she decided, returning to her chair. She mixed a new color on her palette, a blue-grey that suggested distant rain clouds. The color of patient waiting, she named it, applying it with deliberate strokes to suggest the sky beyond the cherry trees. Through the window, Clara noticed how the rain had transformed the meadow grasses. What had been upright stems yesterday now curved in gentle arcs, bowing under the weight of collected moisture. Each blade held its burden of droplets like a string of tiny glass beads, transmitting light rather than merely reflecting it. This quality of inner luminosity fascinated her. "The grasses are candles," she whispered, "lit from within." She made a mental note to perhaps capture them tomorrow, in a different painting. For now, she returned her focus to the cherry blossoms and their rainbow-holding drops. Clara added more water to an area of her painting, then dropped in the palest hint of violet. The pigment spread through the dampened paper in unpredictable patterns, mimicking the way light diffused through actual water. She didn't try to control this process, but rather observed it with appreciation, allowing the materials to behave according to their nature. The rain chain outside clinked softly as a stronger droplet passed through its copper cups. The sound was like a gentle bell, marking the passage of time without demanding attention. Clara glanced at her wooden clock. Nearly 8 o'clock now. The light had continued its subtle shift, the gold tones warming further as the hidden sun climbed higher behind its veil of clouds. She refreshed her tea, pouring a new serving from the porcelain teapot decorated with painted flowers. Steam rose from the chipped blue mug, carrying the mingled scents of lavender and honey throughout the studio once more. Clara held the mug close to her face, letting the warmth and fragrance envelop her senses before taking a small sip. The familiar taste centered her, connecting this morning to all the other mornings she had spent in this way, painting the rain, listening to its music, following its rhythms. Returning to her painting with renewed focus, Clara began to work on the most challenging aspect, capturing the fleeting rainbow she had observed in a single hanging droplet. This required a delicacy of touch that came only with complete patience. She cleaned her brush thoroughly, then prepared the smallest amount of each color she would need. Violet, indigo, blue, green, yellow, orange, red, all mixed to their most transparent state. "Colors that barely exist," she murmured, "just whispers of themselves." With the finest brush she owned, Clara began to suggest the rainbow spectrum within one carefully chosen droplet in her painting. She applied each color with just enough pressure to release the pigment from the brush, then lifted it immediately, allowing the colors to blend at their edges without mixing completely. Outside, the rain's rhythm remained unchanged, its gentle persistence a reminder that some things in the world could be relied upon. Clara found comfort in this continuity, this predictable soundtrack to her mornings. Unlike human music with its deliberate patterns and resolutions, rain created a more organic composition. Similar themes repeating, but never exactly the same. Variations emerging naturally within the consistent whole. As she worked on the rainbow detail, Clara noticed a new visitor to the cherry trees. a small brown wren had arrived, hopping along the branches with quick, efficient movements. Unlike the chickadees earlier, this bird seemed unbothered by the rain, moving through it as if it were simply another feature of the air. "Hello, little wren," Clara whispered, pausing her brush to observe. "You're like a drop of earth among all that pink." The wren paused too, as if hearing her words across the distance, then continued its exploration of the blossomed branches. A few petals dislodged in its wake, floating downward in gentle spirals. Clara returned to her painting, adding subtle touches to suggest these newly falling petals. She used the white of the paper as much as possible, defining the petals by what surrounded them, rather than by direct pigment. This negative space technique created a sense of lightness, of objects barely there, perfectly capturing the ephemeral nature of falling cherry blossoms. The sound of the rain shifted slightly as it eased from the roof to the rain gutters, creating a new liquid melody that joined the patter against the windows and the plinks of the rain chain. Clara found herself breathing in rhythm with these combined sounds, her hand moving across the paper in the same unhurried tempo. She took a moment to tend to her palette, refreshing colours that had begun to dry and mixing new variations of the tones she had been using. This maintenance of her tools was as much a part of her practice as the act of painting itself. Clara cleaned the edge of her palette with a damp cloth, wiped her brushes, adjusted the water in her jars, all with the same present awareness she brought to each brushstroke. The light through the window caught the surface of the water in her clean jar, projecting a small disk of brightness onto the wooden floor nearby. Within this circle of light, Clara could see the shadows of raindrops as they struck the window, creating a secondary display of the rain's pattern. These overlapping layers of perception, the actual rain, its shadow, its sound, its effect on the world outside, all informed her understanding of what she was attempting to capture. As the morning progressed toward its midpoint, Clara felt her painting approaching a similar transition. The foundation had been established, the major elements defined, and now came the period of refinement, the subtle adjustments that would bring the whole into harmony. She sat back slightly, brush resting in her hand, and simply looked at what she had created. The cherry blossoms on her paper had taken on the delicate, rain-washed quality she had observed through her window. Each cluster held its collection of droplets, some suggesting the hidden rainbows she had witnessed, others simply catching and holding the diffused morning light. The background suggested depth without demanding attention, allowing the blossoms themselves to remain the quiet focus. "It needs something more here," Clara murmured, indicating a space near the bottom of the composition. She mixed a soft, muted green on her palette. "The colour of rain-soaked leaves," she named it, and with careful strokes suggested a few leaves among the predominant blossoms. These additions created a necessary counterpoint, the green complementing the pink in a way that enhanced both colours. Outside, the rain had begun to create small rivulets down the trunk of the nearest cherry tree. The water gathered in the ridges of the bark, following gravity's gentle insistence downward in meandering pathways. Clara observed how these thin streams of water caught the light differently than the individual droplets did, reflecting it in continuous ribbons rather than in separate points. Like silver threads being spun, she whispered, adding this new observation to her painting with delicate strokes of a blue so pale it appeared silver in certain light. These subtle additions helped to connect the upper portions of the composition to the lower ones, creating a visual harmony that guided the eye through the entire scene. The wren had departed, but in its place a quiet blessing. A small group of blossoms that had been dislodged by its movements now rested on the stone path below, creating a brief, impermanent arrangement of pink against grey. Clara appreciated this unintentional composition, the way nature constantly created and recreated itself, each moment unique and complete. She added a few final touches to her rainbow droplet, using the corner of a clean paper towel to lift away excess moisture and create a highlight that suggested the droplet's dimensional roundness. This tiny area of the painting, no larger than her smallest fingernail, contained the most detailed work, a complete spectrum in miniature, visible only when viewed closely and in the right light. Clara smiled at this hidden element, this reward for careful attention. The rain's rhythm remained steadfast, though Clara noticed the subtle changes in its sound as the day warmed slightly. The droplets struck the window with a softer percussion now, their impact cushioned by the thin layer of water that had built up on the glass. Through this flowing lens, the world outside took on a quality of gentle distortion. Familiar shapes slightly altered, colours blending at their edges, boundaries made permeable. Clara sipped the last of her now cool tea, savouring the subtle change in flavour as the lavender had continued to steep. She set down her mug and returned her attention to the painting, making minute adjustments to the balance of water and pigment. With a clean, damp brush, she softened certain edges, allowing colours to blend more naturally. With a dry corner of paper towel, she lifted excess moisture from areas that needed more definition. These small interventions required complete presence. Any distraction or hurry would alter the outcome. The sound of wing beats drew her attention back to the window. A pair of mourning doves had arrived at the furthest cherry tree, their grey forms almost invisible against the rain-washed sky. They settled on adjacent branches, their rounded bodies bringing a new shape to the scene, a counterpoint to the delicate, star-like blossoms surrounding them. Clara watched as they huddled close together, sharing warmth in the cool, damp morning. Their presence added to the sense of peaceful companionship that pervaded the rain-soaked garden. As the clock hands approached 9, Clara recognized the familiar sense of completion that always arrived not as a sudden realization, but as a gradual understanding. Like the way daylight fills a room so gradually that the exact moment between darkness and light cannot be precisely named. Her painting had reached this point of gentle completion, where any additional touches would diminish rather than enhance. "There you are," she whispered to the finished work, her voice blending with the rain's continuous patter. The watercolour captured not just the visible cherry blossoms with their burden of raindrops, but the quality of this specific morning. the pearl grey light warming to gold, the constant gentle percussion of rain, the fleeting rainbow hidden within a single droplet. Clara placed her brush in the jar of clean water and watched as tendrils of pale pigment unfurled downward through the liquid. This final release of colour into water marked the transition from active creation to restful appreciation. She wiped her hands gently on a soft cloth kept for this purpose, the fabric bearing years of faint colour stains like a record of past mornings. The rain continued its steady rhythm, unchanged in its gentle persistence. It would continue long after Clara had left her studio, perhaps for the remainder of the day and through the night, nourishing the cherry trees, feeding the meadow grasses, replenishing the distant creek. There was comfort in this continuity, this reliable presence that asked nothing and gave everything. She stood and stretched her back in a slow, deliberate motion, extending her spine upward and then releasing the stretch with a satisfied exhale. Her body had been still for so long that this simple movement brought a pleasant awareness back to her limbs. Outside, the mourning doves remained on their branch, seemingly content to spend their morning in the same rain-soaked stillness that Clara had enjoyed. The painting would need to dry completely before she could add it to her rainy sketches collection. Clara carefully removed it from the easel and placed it on the drying rack near the window, where the diffused light would help the paper release its moisture gradually without causing warping or cracking of the pigments. The rack held several other recent works, studies of rain on various spring subjects, each capturing a different quality of the season's gentle precipitation. She tidied her workspace with the same unhurried attention she had given to the painting itself. First, she poured the used water from her jars into an old ceramic bowl. Later, she would give this pigment-infused water to the potted plants on her covered porch. The colours that had served her painting would continue their usefulness, feeding the green growing things outside her studio. Clara wiped her palette clean with a damp sponge, revealing the aged porcelain beneath the day's colours. The vintage teacup saucer had belonged to her grandmother, its delicate floral pattern now mostly obscured by years of paint stains. These layers of creative residue were, to Clara, as beautiful as the pattern beneath. A record of countless rainy mornings, of attention paid to the quiet miracles outside her window. The rain's sound seemed to deepen as Clara completed these closing rituals, as if responding to her transition from activity to rest. The droplets on the window had merged into continuous streams that transformed the glass into a living canvas, constantly changing, yet somehow always the same. Through this fluid lens, the cherry trees appeared to breathe, their blossoms rising and falling in subtle movements that matched the rhythm of the rain. Clara refilled her chipped blue mug with the last of the lavender tea from her porcelain teapot. The liquid had cooled to room temperature now, but she sipped it anyway, appreciating its different character. The lavender notes more pronounced, the honey more fully integrated. She carried the mug to the window and stood watching the rain-washed world outside, her completed painting drying nearby. The cherry blossoms would continue their brief, beautiful existence, perhaps for another week if the rain remained gentle. Then they would release their hold on the branches and carpet the stone path and meadow in a layer of pink petals. Clara would paint that too, in its time. For now, she had captured this moment. Raindrops on cherry blossoms, holding rainbows in their perfectly curved surfaces. She took one last look at her painting before preparing to leave the studio. The paper had already begun to dry in places, the colours settling into their permanent relationships with one another. What had been fluid was becoming fixed, though never completely. Watercolours always retain something of their original liquidity, a memory of their beginnings. Clara gathered her empty teapot and mug, ready to descend the stairs from her attic studio to the kitchen below. She did not turn on any lights as she moved toward the door. The rain-filtered daylight was sufficient to guide her steps. Behind her, the painting would continue its transformation, from wet to dry, from new to complete. Before her, the day would unfold in its own unhurried way, shaped by the continuing rhythm of the spring rain. As she reached the doorway, Clara paused for one final look back at her studio. The easel now empty, the palette clean, the brushes resting in clear water. The rain would remain, its gentle music playing on without audience, its patterns changing the light that fell across the empty chair, the bare easel, the drying painting. And in this continuing, there was a perfect kind of peace, a reminder that some things remained constant, reliable, endlessly soothing. Clara closed the studio door with gentle care. The rain played on, its lullaby softening the edges of the world.